They say everything is bigger in Texas, and that includes the mistakes. I've been a bartender at a riverfront restaurant in Orange since 2011, and I will never forget the summer of 2015, or the customer named Tommy. My name is Gavin. I'm 38 years old. I started working for a man named Al back in 2011. Al had owned his place on the water since the 1960s. The restaurant wasn't fancy, but it had a real charm. Every summer, the place was packed. People came for the burgers, the cold beer, and the river breeze. When the Texas heat got too intense, people would jump straight off the private dock into the water to cool off. It was practically a local tradition. That all changed one day in June of that year. I was behind the bar when I noticed Al standing perfectly still, staring out at the dock. His face was tense, and his eyes were locked on the surface of the river. Before I could ask what was wrong, Al suddenly barked, "Nobody gets in the water anymore!" The whole bar went silent for a few seconds. Immediately after, Al grabbed a marker and some paper. He wrote, "No swimming," in huge letters. He taped the signs everywhere, especially near the dock, but he didn't give anyone an explanation. The very next day, those flimsy paper signs were replaced. Al put up a large wooden sign with bright red letters, bolted to a post right at the water's edge. From that point on, swimming was strictly forbidden. The customers started complaining. Many people were annoyed and frustrated because they came there specifically to swim, but Al just kept his mouth shut. Then, around July, Tommy showed up. Tommy was about 28 years old and a regular at the bar. He was a big guy, very confident, and a bit of a hothead, though he wasn't usually a troublemaker. That night, Tommy came in with his girlfriend, Victoria. They played pool and ordered a few drinks like they always did. Close to midnight, as I was wiping down glasses behind the bar, I overheard Tommy say, "I'm jumping in that river tonight." I warned him immediately. "Tommy, you know the rules. No one is allowed in the water. Al banned it." He looked at me with a cocky smirk. "I don't care about that old man's rules," he said. With that, Tommy stood up, grabbed Victoria's hand, and walked out the door. I felt an uneasy pit in my stomach, but the bar was still busy, so I couldn't leave my post right away. About 10 minutes later, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the dock. I grabbed a flashlight and sprinted outside. When I reached the water, I froze. Victoria was standing at the very edge of the dock, soaking wet. She was shaking violently, gasping for air, her face completely white. When she saw me, she tried to speak, but couldn't get the words out. She just kept pointing frantically at the middle of the river. "Tommy, it dragged him under." I didn't ask questions. I swept my flashlight across the water. The beam cut through the ripples, and then I saw it clearly. The water was stained a dark, murky red. Under the light, Tommy's body surfaced face down. His back was arched above the water, perfectly still. But the most horrific part happened a split second later. Just as the light hit Tommy's back, the water underneath him surged upward. Something massive and dark gray rose to the surface at incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, a pair of huge jaws clamped onto Tommy's lower half and yanked him down with terrifying force. His body vanished right before my eyes, as if he had been swallowed by the river itself. The water thrashed wildly, leaving behind spreading red clouds and small pieces of debris floating on the surface. Victoria screamed and collapsed, fainting on the spot. I could only stand there, staring at the water. I knew exactly what those floating pieces were, and I knew exactly which part of a human body they had come from. After the attack, the police and wildlife officials moved in. That was when the truth finally came out. On the day Al had banned swimming, he had seen a massive alligator under the dock with his own eyes. The beast was over 11 feet long and weighed at least 400 pounds. It moved through the water like a silent shadow. Al knew exactly how dangerous it was, but instead of telling the public, he chose to stay quiet. He was terrified that he would lose all his business if the news got out. That's why he only put up the no swimming signs. Everyone knew there were gators in the area, but they were usually small and shy. No one really worried about them. Over time, this one had grown into a monster without anyone noticing. According to the records, Tommy was the first person killed by an alligator in Texas in nearly 200 years. To most people, it was just a shocking news story that faded after a few weeks. But for me, it is a haunting memory that I can never erase. I quit working at Al's place and moved to a local bar far from the river. Now, any large body of water makes me shake and lose focus. This story is inspired by a real-life tragedy. Since the 1960s, a man named Al had a riverfront spot in Orange, Texas, where swimming was common. In June 2015, he spotted a massive predator and banned swimming. On July 3rd, 28-year-old Tommy Woodward ignored the warnings and jumped in despite his girlfriend's fears. He was attacked and dragged under by an 11-foot gator. He became the first fatal victim of an alligator attack in Texas in almost 2 centuries.
This happened during the summer when I was 24 years old. Back then, Betty and I were still together. We traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico to celebrate our anniversary. We didn't know that trip would be the beginning of the end for us. On the day it happened, we were walking around the Santa Fe Plaza in the historic Old Town. The area was packed with tourists, souvenir shops, and restaurants lined up side by side. After a while, Betty said her stomach was hurting and asked me to go buy some antacids. She told me she would wait right in front of the public restrooms nearby. I headed off, thinking I'd only be gone for a few minutes. But since I didn't know my way around the tourist district, it took me nearly 30 minutes to find a store and get back. When I returned to the spot, Betty was gone. At first, I wasn't too worried. I figured she might have stepped inside the restroom or was just browsing a shop close by. I waited for a few minutes and then called her. The phone rang, but nobody picked up. I called 4 more times with the same result, and that's when the panic started to set in. I walked circles around the plaza, checking every bench, every craft stall, and all the small side streets leading off the square. I kept calling her over and over, but Betty never answered and was nowhere to be found. I was officially terrified. Betty wasn't the type of person to just wander off without saying anything. Even if she were mad at me, she would have at least sent a text. Then, my phone vibrated. It was a very long iMessage from Betty's number. The content left me speechless. She said she was fed up with our relationship and wanted to end things immediately. She told me not to look for her because she had already taken a taxi and left the city. I was shocked, angry, and confused all at once. I couldn't understand how someone who just asked me to buy them medicine could suddenly break up with me in such an abrupt and nonsensical way. I tried calling her back, but the phone was turned off. I texted her asking for an explanation, but there was no reply. Frustrated and hurt, I wandered around the old town looking for a bar to clear my head. That's when I saw something strange in a secluded corner. 2 middle-aged women were dragging a young girl along the sidewalk. The girl looked completely out of it. Her eyes were glazed over, and her limbs were limp as if she had no strength left. To a stranger, it looked like 2 friends helping someone who had too much to drink, but my gut told me something was wrong because of how forced it looked. I stepped forward and asked if they needed help. Immediately, the 2 women jumped, let go of the girl, and muttered something about their friend being too drunk before disappearing into the crowd. Once the girl caught her breath, she told me a horrifying story. She had just stepped out of a restroom when two strange women approached her, pretended to be her friends, and started dragging her away. When she tried to cry out for help, they told bystanders she was just drunk. People just watched with pity or annoyance, and no one stepped in to help. Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. I immediately thought of Betty. The coincidence was too terrifying to ignore. I ran straight to a nearby police station to file a report, but the officers were incredibly dismissive. They looked at the breakup text on my phone and shrugged it off as relationship drama, saying she had clearly stated she was leaving. They told me to go back to my hotel and wait. I left the station feeling helpless and searched the plaza for Betty one last time. Finally, exhausted and hopeless, I went back to the hotel. When I opened the door, I was stunned to see Betty there. She was sitting on the floor in a state of total shock. She was covered in scratches and dirt, and her face was deathly pale. After I calmed her down, she finally told me about the kidnapping drama she had just survived in broad daylight. While she was waiting for me, two strange women dressed like tourists approached her. They suddenly grabbed her by the hair and started screaming at her. They yelled to the surrounding crowd that Betty was a professional scammer who had just stolen a large sum of money from them. Their aggression and the details of their lies were so convincing that the people passing by believed them. Bystanders looked at Betty with judgment. Some even whispered in agreement with the victims instead of helping her. Just like that, in the middle of a crowded square, Betty was abducted. They took her down into a basement room that Betty described as looking like a private lounge or a karaoke room. There were two other girls already trapped in there. A short time later, a man walked in. According to Betty, everything he said made it clear that the three of them were part of a human trafficking deal. He said he was waiting for the other side to inspect the merchandise, but he seemed angry because there was some kind of complication. In the end, the deal fell through. After a tense standoff, the kidnappers decided to let all three girls go. Before they left, the men made a very clear threat. If anyone went to the police, the consequences would be fatal because they knew how to find them. It was obvious then. The breakup text I received had been sent by the kidnappers. I immediately insisted on going back to the police to show them the location of the basement and take down the gang, but Betty was so traumatized by the threats that she flatly refused. She just wanted to leave Santa Fe immediately and never look back. We had the biggest fight of our lives over this. I felt that staying silent was helping criminals, but she felt I wasn't being sensitive to her safety or the safety of our families. In the end, we drove back to Los Angeles without reporting it. But what happened in Santa Fe didn't stay there. It lingered between us. Betty became more and more withdrawn. I couldn't get over my feelings of helplessness and anger. Eventually, after many more arguments, we broke up. That story is a painful lesson I will never forget. To this day, whenever I travel, I never let my loved ones stand alone for too long. My name is Emily. 2 years ago, I was 25 and living a stable life in a quiet suburb of Vermont. My life was pretty simple back then, working as an accountant. I used to dream about having a cozy home with a warm-hearted man to share the long winters with. That was the reason I downloaded Tinder and met Daniel. Daniel was 31 at the time and a third-generation manager for a well-known hotel chain. He had everything a woman could want: a solid career, good looks, and a very attentive way about him. Most importantly, just like me, he often talked about his desire to start a family. Because we seemed to want the same things, and he appeared so sincere, I said yes when he proposed after we had dated for over a year. Even then, deep down, I didn't truly feel like I loved him enough. We got engaged and moved in together. That's when the first cracks started to show. Daniel slowly became cold toward me. I even got the feeling that he was intentionally avoiding me. At the time, I told myself it was just work stress. I figured that having some friction when you first move in together was normal. I chose to trust him and tried even harder to change myself to fit into his life. 1 month before the wedding, I officially quit my job. On my last day, my coworkers threw me a small farewell party. I left the office carrying a huge bouquet of flowers, my heart full of hope for this new chapter of my life. As I walked out of the office building, I was still feeling a little buzzed and happy from the party. Suddenly, I bumped into a woman walking toward me. Everything happened so fast. Before I could even look up to apologize, she lunged at me. I only caught a glimpse of the wild, crazed look in her eyes before I felt a sharp, agonizing pain pierce my stomach and my head. I collapsed. The sounds around me became distorted. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears, chaotic screaming, and people calling my name as my coworkers rushed to tackle the woman. In the delirium before I blacked out, I heard her voice screaming hysterically.
You have to disappear. If you're gone, I finally get to be with him.
I woke up in the hospital after 3 days in a coma and 2 life-saving surgeries. But the real death blow came from the police report. The fiancé I had trusted for 2 years had actually been leading a double life. The woman who attacked me was his 29-year-old mistress. They had been together long before I ever entered the picture. Daniel had fed her a sick delusion. He told her I was just a practical choice for his family's business image, but that she was his true love. As our wedding date got closer, her desperation turned into violence. She truly believed that if I no longer existed, Daniel would have no choice but to put her in my place. And just like that, I, an innocent person, became the victim of both my future husband and his mistress. My family was absolutely furious. The engagement was called off immediately. Daniel's family was forced to pay for all my medical bills and the cancellation fees for the wedding. But the audacity didn't stop there. The attacker's parents actually came to the hospital to ask for mediation. They made excuses, saying their daughter was also a victim of betrayal and that she had been driven insane by heartbreak. I refused. Being pitiful is not an excuse for attempted murder. When I stood my ground, they immediately flipped. They started spreading malicious rumors on social media, claiming I was the other woman who used dirty tricks to steal their daughter's boyfriend. The nasty rumors began to spread like wildfire. Fake accounts started making up scenarios where I was always the villain. The hateful comments and messages pushed me to my breaking point. I hired a lawyer, filed reports against the accounts defaming me, and spoke out publicly with the truth of my story. Justice was finally served. The woman was sentenced to prison for attempted murder. Daniel and his family paid the price with a ruined reputation, and their company took a massive hit because of the scandal. But the price I paid was also far too high. I still live in Vermont. 2 years have passed, but the scars on my body and my soul are still there. I don't have the courage to believe in promises anymore, and I can't even bring myself to think about starting a family ever again.
My name is Owen. I worked at a small bistro on the outskirts of town for 5 years. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was cozy and mostly filled with regulars. I worked as a server and bartender, and I always made it a point to keep a friendly smile on my face for everyone who walked through the door. The story began in the middle of last March. A woman started coming into the shop every few days. I really took notice of her by the 3rd time she visited. She always sat at table 6 by the window and ordered the exact same thing: a grilled veggie panini, a small bowl of tomato soup, and a latte. She looked very simple, with a gentle and polite manner. She didn't wear heavy makeup or try to draw attention to herself. However, I noticed that every time I served her water, she would give me a very faint, kind smile. It took almost 2 weeks before I built up the courage to start a conversation, and she was very easy to talk to. We started with just a few short sentences, but from that day on, every time she returned, our chats lasted a little bit longer. Then, one day before leaving, she unexpectedly wrote her phone number on a scrap of paper and handed it to me. I froze for a moment because I didn't expect things to go that way. After she left the bistro, I just stood there with the paper in my hand, feeling a mix of surprise and nervous excitement. That night, after my shift ended and I got home, I texted her. I hesitated for a long time before hitting send, but she replied almost instantly. From then on, we started texting almost every day. Our conversations became more and more natural. 3 weeks flew by, and checking for her messages became a daily habit that I truly looked forward to. One evening, when she stopped by the bistro, I gathered all my courage and invited her to my apartment for dinner the following night. I rented a one-bedroom apartment near my work. It wasn't big, but it was clean and quiet. I wanted that evening to be perfect, so I spent the entire afternoon getting ready. I even bought a new set of ceramic plates, set the table carefully, put out fresh flowers, and opened a bottle of wine. Before she arrived, I changed into my best button-down shirt. Seeing her stand in my doorway that night made my heart race. She wore a simple black dress that was very elegant. Dinner went quite smoothly. We ate and talked comfortably. The atmosphere was very pleasant, almost as if we had known each other for years. Around 11 p.m., I suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. At first, I thought I was just tired, but within minutes, things took a turn for the worse. My head felt light, and my limbs became so weak I could barely stay upright. The room began to spin slowly around me. I started sweating heavily, yet my skin felt ice cold. I thought I was just drunk, but I had only finished 1 glass of wine. She immediately stepped toward me, appearing very calm and caring. She helped me lie down on the sofa, pulled a blanket over me, and brought me a glass of water. Her voice was soothing, as she told me I probably just had low blood sugar and needed to rest for a bit. I tried to say something, but my jaw felt stiff and my words were no longer clear. My ears started ringing, and the sounds around me faded away. The last image I remember was her face looking down at me before everything went pitch black. When I woke up, the early morning light was just starting to peek through. The apartment was dark and silent. I was still lying on the sofa with a pounding headache and a body that felt like lead. When I tried to sit up, I saw my phone lying on the floor with a cracked screen. My wallet was gone, and the woman was nowhere to be found. I was rushed to the hospital in a state of drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors ran several tests and discovered an extremely rare neurotoxin in my blood. This specific chemical doesn't knock a person out instantly. Instead, it slowly suppresses the nervous system, slows the heart rate, and kills your reflexes. They confirmed it had been placed in my wine glass. The police tried to track the woman down, but there was almost no trace of her. The phone number she gave me had been disconnected. The social media accounts she mentioned had all vanished, and the address she gave was fake. The police searched my apartment, but they couldn't find a single significant clue. To make matters worse, I fell into despair as the consequences of that night destroyed the rest of my life. The toxin caused permanent damage to a portion of my brain. Now, I have a very difficult time speaking. My speech is slurred, I often stutter, and my sentences are broken. Sometimes, I even call the most familiar objects by the wrong names. My arms and legs are much weaker than before, and I can no longer work at the restaurant. Every once in a while, an old friend still comes to visit, and I only ask one single question, over and over again. Have you heard anything about her?
This experience completely changed my perspective on what people call intuition. My name is Kate. A few months ago, I finally got pregnant after nearly 2 years of trying. My husband and I were overjoyed, and we immediately started looking for a better home so our baby could grow up in a great environment. After weeks of searching, we found a gorgeous old house sitting alone on a small hill in a nearby semi-rural town. The strange thing was that the price was unbelievably cheap. I looked at the photos of the interior, and was instantly impressed. I told my husband we had to go see it in person right away. Thanks to an inheritance from my grandparents, we were in a great financial position and could afford to buy it outright without a mortgage. The day we went to see the house, I was even more amazed because it looked much better in person than it did in the pictures. I was ready to sign the contract on the spot. My husband, however, felt the exact opposite. The moment we stepped inside, he became unusually quiet. His face was tense and strained. Even though it was a chilly day, he kept wiping sweat from his forehead, and his eyes kept darting toward the door that led to the basement. When I asked him what was wrong, he jumped as if he were startled. I was confused because he wasn't acting like himself at all. As soon as the real estate agent stepped outside to take a phone call, my husband grabbed my arm and whispered to me. He said very quietly that something was wrong with the house. He told me the basement felt like he was staring into a bottomless black hole. He had a powerful gut feeling that something evil was down there, waiting for someone to come down. I just stared at him blankly. At first, I almost wanted to laugh. I tried to brush it off and kept rambling about the perfect layout and the amazing price we couldn't pass up. But my husband abruptly cut me off. He gripped my shoulders and looked me straight into the eyes with a level of seriousness I had never seen before. He practically begged me to listen to him just this once. My husband is a civil engineer. He is extremely rational and calm. I knew he wasn't the type to make things up. I asked him softly, "Do you really want to leave?" He answered without a second of hesitation, "Yes, right now." We left immediately, leaving the real estate agent standing there looking completely baffled. A few weeks later, we bought a different house. It wasn't as beautiful and cost a bit more, but the atmosphere was peaceful. Our lives settled down, but a small part of me remained frustrated and curious about that old house. One night, my curiosity finally got the better of me, and I started searching for the address of the old house online. The search results I found in the middle of the night left me paralyzed with fear. That house on the hill was actually the scene of a horrific crime that the agent had hidden from the listing. 15 years ago, a couple lived there. The wife was obsessively in love with her husband and had a sick fear that he would leave her because she couldn't have children. This led her to a twisted plan. During an argument, she pushed her husband down the basement stairs and locked the door, trapping him inside. The man didn't die. He only suffered minor injuries from the fall. But that wasn't a stroke of luck. It was the beginning of a nightmare. For many years afterward, he was kept prisoner in that dark basement. Every day, the wife slid food to him through a tiny slit in the basement door. Meanwhile, she lived a normal life upstairs as if nothing had ever happened. It wasn't until the wife passed away from old age that people finally broke the door down. They found two bodies, one lying peacefully in the bed upstairs and a shriveled skeleton curled up in the basement. After reading the full history of that house, I felt a violent chill run down my spine. I am so lucky we didn't buy that place. It truly feels like a miracle that my husband's intuition was so terrifyingly accurate.
I thought I'd gotten a great deal on a house until I discovered the horrifying secret hidden inside. I'm Maya, a freelance designer. In March of last year, I decided to leave Los Angeles. City life had exhausted me. The endless traffic, skyrocketing rent, and the feeling of loneliness in a city of millions. I wanted to find a quiet place, a small town in Northern California, to start a new life. I finally chose a small town called Grass Valley, nestled among the pine forests of the Sierra Nevada. On Craigslist, I found a house for an unbelievably low price. I called the seller immediately. "Hi, I'm Will," a tired voice answered. I asked about the house, and he explained that it was old in a secluded area, and he wanted to sell it quickly. Will emphasized that he only accepted cash because he didn't trust banks or real estate agents. I scheduled a time to see the house before making a decision. A few days later, I drove 3 hours from Los Angeles to Grass Valley to see the house. Will was a middle-aged man with an unapproachable demeanor.
The house was old but sturdy, surrounded by many trees and about 5 miles from town. When I asked him why he was selling it so cheaply, Will was silent for a moment, then said, "My wife, Ella, disappeared 2 months ago. I'm desperate to find her. Everything in this house reminds me of Ella, and I just can't stay here anymore." I was quiet after hearing Will's story, feeling sympathy for him instead of the unapproachable feeling I had at first. As Will showed me around the house, I heard a faint scratching sound from inside a wall somewhere. "What's that?" Will shrugged. "Squirrels and mice. They've been a problem for years. It's because of all the trees around here." Will generously offered to include all the tools and building materials if I agreed to buy the house, since he didn't need them anymore. I signed the contract that same day and gave Will the full amount in cash. Before he left, he stood there for a long time, looking around as if he was very attached to the place. 3 days later, I moved in with my best friend Levi to help me fix up the house. Levi is a contractor, so I completely trusted him to make all the decisions. On the first day, we planned to repaint the living room. As we took down all the items hanging on the walls, I noticed a picture of a woman with long hair. This must have been Ella, the wife Will mentioned. I carefully put the picture in a corner. When we started painting the walls, the scratching sound returned. This time it was louder and more frantic. "That animal sounds pretty big and strong," Levi said. "We should probably call a service to handle it." We turned on some music to drown out the noise and continued our work. By the third day, as we were cleaning out the basement, I heard a faint sound, like someone crying. "Did you hear that?" I asked Levi. He stopped what he was doing and listened. "It's probably just the wind." But the next day, the crying returned, along with some screaming. At this point, we started to feel uneasy, but I had put all my money into this house. I had no choice but to continue with my plan. The next day, while doing some repairs in the basement, we discovered a wall that looked strange. The bricks and mortar were newer than the rest. "This wall was built recently," Levi said, touching the surface. "There might be another room behind it." After some discussion, we decided to break down the wall. After nearly an hour, we had created a large enough opening for us to go inside. Levi went first, shining his flashlight. Immediately, we were hit by an overwhelming stench. The flashlight beam swept around the room. We realized it was a small, windowless room with a low ceiling. Then I noticed the long brown hair of a woman. She was lying face down on the concrete floor, her body curled up. I screamed, clutching onto Levi, my heart pounding. He was also panicked and quickly shined the flashlight into another corner. But by doing so, we accidentally discovered the next horror. In the opposite corner, another woman was sitting, leaning against the wall, her head bowed. This time, Levi screamed even louder than I did. Suddenly, the woman slowly looked up. Her lips moved as if she was trying to say something. I started to walk towards the woman, despite Levi's attempts to stop me. My emotions were incredibly mixed at that moment. There was shock, disbelief, and a little anger. This was the house I had put all my money and effort into buying. I couldn't accept that it held such a horrifying secret. When I got closer, the woman looked at me with a look of great hope. On the wall near her, there were countless claw marks with dried blood on them. I realized this was the source of the scratching we had been hearing for the past few days. It was only then that I truly understood the horror of the situation. This woman had been locked in here for months, living in absolute darkness, with no food, only drops of water leaking from a pipe. She had been living next to a dead body. I pulled out my phone with a trembling hand and called 911. The police and an ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. They took the surviving woman to the hospital immediately and secured the scene. I sank into a chair and buried my face in my hands, crying. I knew I had been scammed, and all my plans and dreams were shattered. Levi sat down and comforted me for a long time. That day, the police arranged for us to stay somewhere else. 2 days later, the investigating officer called me. The woman who survived is Ella Thompson, the wife of Will Thompson, the man who sold me the house. The woman who died is Anna Kim, 24 years old. Ella had told us the whole truth. Anna Kim had come to the house to demand that Will leave his wife and marry her, threatening to tell Ella everything. Will killed Anna in a fit of rage, and when Ella threatened to call the police, he locked both of them in the room and sealed the wall. I felt stunned and cried a lot again when I learned the whole truth. Will was arrested at a motel in Sacramento. He confessed to murder and unlawful imprisonment. Ella recovered after 3 weeks of treatment at the hospital. As for me, I put the house back up for sale after having everything in the basement completely cleaned out. I'm living in a small apartment now. I learned an expensive lesson. Nothing is cheap and good in this world, and certainly nothing is free. It's Thanksgiving today. It's chilly outside, but inside our small house, warm laughter mixes with the faint smell of roasted turkey. The whole family is gathered together after the big meal, eating dessert and sharing memorable stories from past holidays. We laugh as my son tells a story about playing hide and seek with the neighborhood kids. Then, a memory from a Thanksgiving many years ago rushes into my head. It happened when I was 7 years old, and no matter how many holidays have passed, it has never truly left my mind. My family lived in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs. Right next door was the house of Mrs. Edith, a woman famous for being odd and extremely lonely. Her house was always gloomy, with tall overgrown grass in the yard and curtains closed all day long. The kids in the neighborhood used to call her the witch. Whenever we played nearby, she would slide open a window, look down with cold, sharp eyes, and yell at us. For me, the fear was much worse. Every time I walked past her house, I would get a strange, chilling feeling down my spine. A few times I glanced up and saw Mrs. Edith standing there, staring at me from an upstairs window. After that, I would take a deep breath and run all the way home every time I passed her house. I always believed she hated all kids, especially me. That November, a few days before Thanksgiving, Mrs. Edith was found dead inside her house. Neighbors whispered to each other, it was about time. The police sealed the house, and later, no relatives showed up for her funeral. I heard my parents say she had no living family. Everyone in the neighborhood was used to her living alone for decades. On that Thanksgiving day, after our family dinner, I asked my parents if I could go outside and play with my friend. It was already dark, and the roads were still wet from an afternoon rain shower. When I walked past the alley behind Mrs. Edith's house, I suddenly stopped. A faint glow of light was leaking out from the back door of the sealed house. I stepped closer. The weak light inside shone through the crack in the door and onto the dusty, foggy glass pane. Through the thin layer of dust, I suddenly saw a figure. My breath caught in my throat. The person stood absolutely still, right behind the glass door. Even though the blurry glass distorted everything, I could still see that the person was looking straight at me. The most haunting thing was the two deep black eye sockets, empty like two bottomless holes. I stood there frozen, my arms and legs stiff, completely numb. Then, a creak sound came from the door, which jolted me awake. I let out a piercing scream and dashed out of the alley. I swore the figure I saw was definitely Mrs. Edith. When I got home, I didn't dare tell anyone. My parents would think I was hallucinating from watching too many horror movies. My friends would just laugh and call me a coward. I pulled the blanket over my head and lay still. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining things, but the fear just grew bigger and bigger, making my sleep restless all night long. A week later, the main road was blocked by a truck unloading furniture. With no other way to go, I was forced to take the small alley behind Mrs. Edith's house. I tried to walk as fast as I could, looking down at the ground. Near the end of the alley, I was surprised to see Mr. Adams standing there, quietly looking at Mrs. Edith's house. He lived in the neighborhood too, and everyone knew him. I greeted him with a shaky voice, relieved to see an adult there. He turned around and gave me a soft smile. The house is going to be torn down soon. I just nodded, and as I was about to walk on, he suddenly spoke. "Hey, you really look like that little boy." "What little boy?" Mr. Adam looked at me and then told me the story. Mrs. Edith once had a son, the same age as me, when he vanished. The little boy mysteriously disappeared right outside their front door one November afternoon. The police searched for months using every method possible, but they never found anything. The boy had simply disappeared into thin air. She lived with that pain, and it wore her down, changing who she was without her even realizing it. Edith didn't hate children. She just couldn't bear to see them without thinking of her own son. I stood there, feeling confused by Mr. Adams' story. Even though I didn't fully understand everything he said, strangely, I didn't feel scared anymore. I slowly turned my head and looked at Mrs. Edith's house one last time. Through the window glass, I saw a picture of a younger Mrs. Edith with a little boy. They were smiling very happily. Now that I am a father myself, I can finally understand how much loss can absolutely crush a person. Mrs. Edith wasn't a witch. She was a mother, trapped in a pain she had no one to share with. On a recent trip to visit my parents, I looked over at the spot where Mrs. Edith's house used to be. Her house is gone now, replaced by a bigger, beautiful new house where a happy family lives. I hope their happiness can offer some comfort to Mrs. Edith's soul, even if just a little bit.